This is the information about Fred Hollows for our reading today. Dr. Hollows. In 1955, Fred Hollows qualified as a medical doctor. Back in 1948, that had not been in his plans. In that year, Hollows entered Bible College in Dunedin. While there, he began to think about life. He thought about rich people and poor people and the way they lived. He thought about the way some people helped other people who were sick, poor or weak. In the summer break, he worked in a hospital for people with mental illness. He decided that he wanted to work in the science that deals with behaviour and the human mind, or psychology. He no longer wanted to be a clergyman. He switched to science and arts courses. In 1950, he finished his degree in Wellington. He was one of the top 100 students in New Zealand in his subjects. Because of Hollows' good grades, the University of Otago offered him a place at its medical school, so Hollows began his studies there in 1951. In 1955, he finished his last year of medical studies. At the end of the year, he qualified as a medical doctor. And this is him with his brothers John, Colin, Fred and Maurice in 1953. Hollows worked during his summer holidays to help pay for his studies. He worked in forestry and in building. During one of his holidays, he got interested in climbing mountains. The first one he climbed was Mount Cook, the highest mountain in New Zealand. One of his holiday jobs was as an alpine guide at a resort in 1953. There he met Mary Skiller. Mary would become his wife in 1958. Hollows worked as a doctor for 6 years in New Zealand. During this time, he became interested in eye diseases. He decided he wanted to specialise in treating eye diseases. He would become an ophthalmologist. And that's the Hollows family in 1950s. Mary and Fred are in the circle at the far right. In the 1960s, some Aboriginal people in Australia started to protest. They objected to the way other Australians treated them. They objected to the taking of the land that had always belonged to their people, or ancestral land. In 1968, the novelist Frank Hardy wrote a book about Gurindji people. The Gurindji people lived and worked at Wave Hill Cattle Station in the Northern Territory. They wanted better pay for the work they did, and they wanted their ancestral land back. They walked away from Wave Hill and their jobs. They went to Wattie Creek, where they stayed for 9 years. Hollows had read Hardy's book. He went to a public meeting where Hardy spoke, and the two men met. Hardy later introduced Hollows to some of the Gurindji people. Hollows treated 2 of these people for eye health problems. When they went back to Wattie Creek, they invited Hollows and a few other doctors to come there for a week or 2. The people at Wattie Creek were in great need of medical care. When Hollows examined the people at Wattie Creek, he was sad and angry at what he found. He said it was like something out of a medical book from long ago. He said he saw eye diseases that were worse than any seen in Western society for many years. The lack of proper care and the suffering of the people there shocked him. Hollows did a lot to help the people of Australia. Back in Sydney after his trip to Wattie Creek, he spoke to the news media. He spoke about how different health services were in the city compared to the outback. He also spoke about the difference between eye health care for Aboriginal Australians and for white Australians. This was the beginning of his life's work. He would work to improve the eye health of Australians. Later in his life, he would also work to improve eye health of people in poor countries. Eye checks find many problems. In 1970, Hollows met Dr. Max Kamen at a party. Kamen was a psychiatrist. At that time, he was studying mental health in the outback town of Bourke. He had noticed that the Aboriginal people of Bourke had severe eye problems. He asked Hollows to bring a medical team to Bourke to look into the situation. Hollows did so. He also went to Angonia, a small town about 100 kilometres north of Bourke. In both towns, he found widespread eye problems. Trachoma, in particular, was common. There's a picture of the places that he went to, Bourke and Angonia, Wave Hill right at the top. I also wanted to show you the timeline, which you have a copy of here. Fred Hollows is born in Dunedin, New Zealand, enters Bible College in Dunedin, finishes Bachelor of Arts degree in Wellington, New Zealand. Excuse me. Studies medicine at University of Otago, Dunedin. Marries Mary Skiller. Studies ophthalmology in London, England. Works as an ophthalmologist in Cardiff, Wales. Becomes Associate Professor of Ophthalmology at the University of New South Wales. Helps set up the first Aboriginal centre in Redfern, Sydney. Works in South America. Fred's first wife Mary dies. Becomes Director of the National Trachoma and Eye Health Program. Marries Gabby O'Sullivan. Goes on first trip to Nepal. Refuses to accept the Order of Australia. Goes on first trip to Eritrea. Is diagnosed with cancer. Becomes an Australian citizen. The Fred Hollows Foundation is established. Fred Hollows dies in Sydney. Intraocular lens laboratories open in Eritrea and Nepal.